Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is my great pleasure to welcome you at the 1853rd, 53rd? I think so, lecture of the Royal Society for Natural Sciences. That is the correct translation, because some people think it's only about physics. No, it is the tradition of the Age of Enlightenment, and therefore it is natural sciences that this society is about. And I have the great pleasure to introduce Malvina Nissim, who has studied linguistics at the University of Pisa, but she was in love with computers since she was a little girl, and so it is no surprise that she switched to computational linguistics for her PhD, which she did at the University of Pavia, and immediately started her European wanderings, because half of her PhD was done in Edinburgh at the, the School of Information Sciences, where she did also postdoc, and then she came back to Italy to do another postdoc at the Italian Research Council's Institute for Cognitive Science and Technology. And then she joined the University of Bologna to start her academic career, and at the Department of Linguistics. And since 2014, we have the great joy of having her here in Groningen, where she is at the Faculty of Arts, in the Center of Language and Cognition, and she holds the chair of Computational Linguistics and Society. So Malvina has a very strong engagement, not only for the aspect of teaching computers to understand and language and to talk. She also is very much concerned with the ethics that is associated with all these questions. In fact, she's also on the ethics committee of the Association for Computational Linguistics. And I think we are going to enjoy a nice lecture, because Malvina a few years ago was also chosen as the teacher of the year of our university. So Malvina, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Petra. Can you hear me all right? Is the mic on? Yeah. Thanks so much for the intro, and thanks for the invite. I have to say that every time I'm presented as someone who has won the Teacher of the Year award, I always feel a little bit of pressure. But I think one of the reasons actually I got that is maybe weirdly, but because I ask a lot of questions when I teach. So be ready for questions, because you'll get several, and I'd like you to answer. So sometimes students need to be pushed a bit, like I have to wait and ask the question again. But, you know, you're warned, so please do answer my questions. As Petra said, let's see if this works. Does it work? Not yet. Just wanted to click. It's gone. Okay. It worked. Don't know. No, this was, it looks like I have to start the presentation again. Don't know why. Okay, here. Now we see that. Oh yeah, that funny thing was appearing earlier, but I think we can live with it. If it's the only way to see the presentation, I think we can live with this green thingy there. It's okay. So who am I? That's me. I'm a computational linguist, and when you're at parties or so, or you meet someone on the train and they go, oh, what do you work on? I have to say I'm a computational linguist. It's always a bit hard to say what I do. Sometimes I prefer to say, I don't know, I'm a surgeon. That's very understandable, or I'm a lawyer, or so, but I have to say I'm a computational linguist. So I often summarize it that way. So I work with computers and language so that we can better understand language by treating it automatically, but also we can help machines to use language so that they can also interact with us. And I'm sure you also have a lot of interaction daily with machines that understand language. But we'll talk a lot about that tonight. So, as Petra said, I hold a chair at the university here, which is called Computational Linguistics and Society, because I'm really interested in the impact that what I do, what we do as a community of computational linguistics, has on society. And that's core to tonight's talk. Now, that's me, and we also have you. So I think I have to use this here, otherwise it doesn't work. So the KNG. And to know a little bit more about the society, I tried to gather some information. Now, I got this. KNG-Groningen is a society for people who want an individualized knowledge of their own health and wellness. We encourage you to browse through our directory of over 350 popular healthcare websites. If we get something that's worth your time or attention, please click on Add to Cart. I thought, no. Probably not the right description. Then I found this. KNG-Groningen is one of the 2 German factories in Groningen dedicated to manufacturing new motors for BMW and Audi. No, right? No, don't think so. No, don't think. More specifically on what kind of lectures are hosted. So the KNG hosts lectures on climate change. I think, which will include panels on how to develop effective strategies to address warming, but how we can continue to learn in the face of a global oceanography that threatens global food security. Is that you? No, it's another KNG. Another KNG-Groningen. And this is that you host lectures on human rights and democracy, plus has the distinction of leading a world tour to a group of NGOs with expertise on issues around human rights and democracy. The group also manages the NGO Forum for Peace. Is that you? No, so they're all not the right KNG. So where do you think I got them? I Googled and then I got them on Google? Where did I find these descriptions that are not you? But, I don't know, the climate change or on the internet. Yeah, almost. All these are automatically generated. They're not real. I mean, we can discuss, are they real? They're not factual. They're completely made up by a machine. Completely. I didn't touch them. I didn't change the syntax. I didn't do anything. What did I do? I did something to make it generate something appropriate for tonight. And it was, I prompted it. I prompted the machine and said, continue this prompt. So I wrote, the KNG hosts lectures on, and then the machine continued and wrote that stuff. Yeah, it's impressive, isn't it? It's fake news. Yeah, we'll get back to that. It is. Because some of you maybe suspected that. But it's very hard to tell that these are not written by someone and do not reflect something that actually is there in reality. It's completely made up. Yeah, it's impressive, I find. Now, I think, I was also talking to Petra right before starting, you also face something, probably daily, which is also quite impressive. And I'm going to get there, because first, I want to tell you what's at the core of these models. This is one of the only, 2 kind of technical slides, but not even. I just want to tell you that the model that created that text is called GPT-2. I'll get back to that. And it works it's a complex way, but the idea is that it tries to predict the next word. Okay? That's what it tries to do. When it has predicted one, it will put it back in the input, and then it will just go on. Okay? So this, how does it work? It just has learned from a huge amount of data. By having seen a lot of texts that we have written, that a lot of people have written, and so on, it has learned to do language. Okay? Just this is, for now, what we need to know to proceed. Okay? And these models are super powerful right now. You are impressed with what you've seen. And you're not the only ones, of course. This is a description of GPT-2. Text-generating AI systems, so artificial intelligence systems, such as the GPT-2 system developed by OpenAI, name of a company that developed GPT-2, and unveiled last week, this is a couple of years ago, may be more likely to evolve into human-like machines than traditional AI, says OpenAI researcher James Kufner. If these systems can be trained to do certain tasks that are similar to humans, then we can expect to see a human-level intelligence emerge, not just in the short run, but in the long run, says Kufner. Now, this is a description of what the model is and its potential, and now you might not be that surprised if I tell you, what am I going to tell you? That this is self-written. So, yeah. So GPT-2 wrote about itself. Okay? Now, James Kufner, I don't think is the head of OpenAI, so factually it's problematic, but not all of it. Now, this is partially manipulated to make it a bit more coherent, because if you write very long things, at some point, things will go a bit weird, but little manipulated. And there was an article, there are some links, I don't know if then later, I think the slides are accessible somehow, you can also follow the links if you're interested. So there was an article, very recursive, right? So an article written about GPT-2, which is written from GPT-2. So there was, yeah. So it says OpenAI releases GPT-2, text-generating AI systems. This is what you've seen before, this text. And up there, there's a sort of disclaimer. The following content was generated by OpenAI GPT-2 with tiny modifications. So what the model was given was some paragraph titles, and then it was asked to continue. It's quite amazing what's possible right now. And let me tell you, this is called GPT-2, but now what we have is GPT-3. Imagine what GPT-3 can do. And it's much better than GPT-2. So it's really nearly not distinguishable from human writing. Okay? But factually, it creates a lot of information that has no connection with the real world. It can say a lot of wrong things. Now, this amazement with technology, I think you also notice probably daily, at least I do. Do you use Google Translate? Yeah, right? Yeah, it's a blessing, yes. Yes. So as you can see there, I thought I didn't do it on purpose, but I realized my 3 languages are there. So the languages I have to juggle daily at work, at home, and everywhere. Like it's English, Dutch, and Italian. And I think everyone by now, it's so common. You just check it on Google Translate and see what happens. And I don't know if you are a sort of older user in terms of like, you've been using it for a long time or only recent, but if you've been using it for a long time, hasn't it gotten so much better? In the past, you couldn't, you would just put something in, and then it would just tell you something to understand what the topic was. But now, it makes really good sentences. It's really good. The texts are great. Depends on the pairs of languages, but the texts are fantastic. Now, I tried to do that. Yeah, it's an idiom. She was over the moon. Yeah, this is correct in Dutch, right? Yeah, I could attempt to read that, but I will spare you. And if I do something slightly different, it will get it right. Yeah, and a few years back, even I think 2 years ago, you couldn't really count on that. Yeah, this is a very hard task for machines. Because the meaning is not compositional. It means you cannot take the single pieces and say, I've seen it somewhere else, let me recompose it together. This is really like goes in blocks. You need to know that there's something very different there. Right? But it's very, very good. And it's good to the point that a few years ago, Microsoft, who has its own translation system, said translation quality is a human parity when compared to professional human translations. It's quite a big statement. What happens then to translators? Fired? I don't know. But you know how the systems work? They need to see a lot of parallel, a lot of translations to learn from them. How do I translate from English to Dutch? I have to see a lot of pairs of English and Dutch. And who makes these pairs? The translators. Are they just kicking themselves out of their jobs? Now, this is from Microsoft, and it's talking about a system that was Chinese to English in the news. But, you know, as we've seen, the other systems are also really pretty good. Now, machine translation is one of the several tasks that go under the large umbrella of, say, language technology, or normally called natural language processing. I've put some examples there. So this is Google Translate. I can do this, although I think they might not see it at home, but this, Google Translate. This is a bit, maybe not that good symbol, but I meant generation. This is, for example, hate speech detection, very common as well as a task online. This is matching automatically job ads with CVs. Is it a good idea? Companies use this a lot. Big companies, you know, you have to go through a lot of, you have an ad, you have to go through lots of CVs. Let's match them automatically. I found the perfect person. And this is emotion detection. It's also used in other tasks as well. So you have a text, you want to tell whether that text gives you joy or sadness, and, you know, what is the emotional component of a text. And this one up here is called author profiling. It's quite interesting. And it's also used a lot in advertisement. You probably also get ads when you are online. And you go like, how did it know that I really wanted to do this? Or how did it know that I was actually, you know, looking at socks, or that I'm a person in that age that actually might need this item, or and so on. So profiling is taking a text and trying to gather some traits automatically about who wrote it. Normally is gender, or I'm really simplifying, but it's like gender or age. You know, these are classic traits. Now, to give you an idea of how this works, I will ask you to do that, not a machine, okay? So we just see a few tweets. This is often done on tweets. I'll show you some tweets, and then you can tell me, I'll just ask you to raise your hand. You can tell me whether you think they're written by a male or a female, okay? Very, very wide, broad approximation. Fine? You ready? Okay. This one. I grew up watching many war films. Hacksaw Ridge is the best one I've seen. Had me on edge, feels like you're there. How many think is a male? Okay. And how many think is a female? Okay. It's a female. I know. It's not easy. It's really not easy. This one, I'm not going to read it because it's too complicated, but you can see that. How many think is a male? How many think is a female? Oh, basically no one. It is a male. Well done. What about this? And you cannot even see the picture. Yeah. Is it a female or a male? How many think is male? How many think is male? One there. How many think is female? Basically everyone. And almost everyone is wrong. What about this? Who think is a male? Bart thinks is a male. It is a male. I didn't even bother to ask who thought it was a female, because everyone else. And this one is the one but last. Oh, I already told you it's a female. But you can, yeah, so I guess you probably would have said female? Yeah. And what about this? Now, okay. I see that you're like, why are you struggling? Because you're focusing on some cues, right? Yeah. Okay, and am I right in thinking that your cues are these three nice hearty smileys, And the other one is probably the Nintendo Switch or the build quality. Build quality, okay. So who thinks is a male? Okay, who thinks is a female? Fewer. This is a male. What have we learned? Yeah, we have learned something, but we will talk about that later. We've also learned that this is really not easy. It's not an easy task. And the other tasks are also not that simple, honestly. We struggle with them a lot, also for machines. I mean, do you think that is the aim of the machine to do as well as a person? Approaching a person. Now, if we want the machine to do as well as you tonight in author profiling, that machine is not going to do very well. Right? So when we talk about human parity and so, I'm just throwing at you some concepts that I'd like you to bear in mind. We'll try to pick them all up one by one. Okay? Now, how does this work? How do these models work? The tool that say we'll do author profiling. Of course, overgeneralizing, but as we saw for GPT-2, the general idea is that you have some data that you throw at the model, then you build this model on that data. So it has to be data that tells something. Yeah, it's either large amounts of data or maybe smaller, but with some very important information. And then at the end, you have some output from the model, and then the person will also have to have some interpretation. It's like what I asked you, was that sentence well generated? Or like, what did you think of all these texts that GPT-2 had produced? Okay? Now, this is maybe it's the only other technical slide that I have. For those who ring a bell, I think it's interesting. And for those who doesn't ring a bell, it's not crucial. But the idea is that, and sorry for my writing, that's me drawing, I'm very bad at this. So you have data, and then here there's something that's called feature engineering. That means that basically what you want to specify explicitly is what's interesting about the data. So you want to tell the model, hey, look, check the emojis in the text, or check the use of specific adjectives. What was it, solid build? Maybe solid, it's more associated with males. You specifically tell the model what it has to look for. And then this information is fed to what are called traditional algorithms for learning, for training a model. Now, if you have heard of them, you probably have heard of naive Bayes, decision trees. Maybe, you might not know exactly what they are, but they might resonate a little bit. Or support vector machine. And here, eventually you get a model, and this is the thing that actually does the task. It will tell, yeah, that's a male, no, that's a female, and so on. GPT-2 and all its colleagues and how actually we do things nowadays is different, because this part of feature engineering is completely gone. We don't tell, like, look at this, look at that. We just give data, and these models will acquire information from it. Again, I'm very much simplifying. But this part is completely eliminated. And now we have what are called deep learning algorithms, and these are some other names. You might have heard of them, maybe not crucial. But if you have, they fall in that category. And what we've seen as GPT-2, it's this one. It's a transformer, which is not like, it's also a toy, right? This thing for kids that actually you can change from a car to a robot and so on. Yeah, but the idea is that you have a lot of data, and you just push it in this algorithm like a transformer, and it will learn from it. Okay? So that's the general principle. So how does the model work? How do we do language technology? And after this, we're going to see some more examples. We take a lot of data, as I said, right? You want to make a model that understands language, that knows what language is, that can write. Yeah, can understand language. So data from all places, anything that's been written, usually is good. Yeah, that's the general approach. Lots and lots. Because what did we say the task is? Basically to guess the next word. So the more you see how it works, the more combinations you see, the better. Okay? And then you make these models that are really big. Like that one is GPT, which we've seen, and there's some other names. They all have weird names. All of them. Some are real acronyms. Some are not even really acronyms, just weird stuff. Then you can you say, okay, but look, I have this really huge amount of data, but I only want to work on legal data. Can we do that? So, okay, you don't have to start from scratch, because first the model has to learn how language works. So you just push it a bit more like, okay, model, this is some more legal data. Look at this. Now you know how legal data looks like, how legal language is done. Yeah, but on top. And then eventually, if you want to say, for example, you want to do a final task, for example, profiling, you have to provide eventually a little bit more data for that task. Specifically, like now, I really want you to tell me if it's a male or a female. Now, you've learned how language works. You've learned a bit more about language on Twitter. Now, I really want you to learn specifically to tell female from male. Okay? So that's how it works. And as you can see, the core common aspect is data. There's data here, tons. There's data here, and there's data there, which is usually really manually done, like manually prepared. Okay? Now, from that part, you get some very general representation of what language is, also what meanings are there, syntax, everything about language. And that part, instead, is really used to solve a specific problem. Now, let's focus a sec on this part, here on the general representation. What do these models know? Think again of the generated paragraphs that I've shown you. They're fake, but they're quite coherent. They're not bad. For example, the model had learned that if it's talking about BMW, it also makes sense to talk about Audi. It didn't say BMW and Apple. It said BMW and Audi. It knows that they probably often go together. Yeah? So we can look at these models. Of course, we're not going to get into the techniques, but if anyone is interested, I'm happy to talk about that. So if we look at these models in technical ways, we can see some correlations that exist in the models. Now, for example, this is a classic one. It's very interesting, I find. So you see that man and woman, for example, are in this part of a given space, and king and queen are in this part, in a sort of parallel way. So what the model has learned is that there's a relationship between these two, man and woman, but there's also a relationship between these two, and that has something similar to that one. And it does make sense, right? Because king is a man, a royal man, and queen is a royal woman. So there is a relationship. And also, you see morphological stuff, so walked and walking, swam and swimming, right? This is past, and this is the gerund, and this is also past, and this is the gerund. Yeah, you can see that they're related. So the past is here red, the gerund is here yellow, so it knows they're similar. But it also knows that these two are related. Yeah, walked and walking and swam and swimming. Right? It's pretty impressive. How did it learn it? From just looking at data. It wasn't taught. It wasn't told like, hey, check if those two are similar. It just processes data and tries to get the next word. And the model that comes out, if you peek into it, you see these things. And look at this. I think this is also very interesting. So it learns relationships between country and capital. Yeah, so it understands that, for example, Hanoi, Tokyo, and Beijing are kind of similar to one another in the same way that Vietnam, Japan, and China are similar, and they share the same relation. It's really cool. Yeah, they're very good. It's incredible, actually, I find, the kind of relationships that they learn. So you can also ask them then. So there's a tool that's called the analogy tool, and you can sort of check with the models what they have learned. So if I say, Brussels is to Belgium as Rome is to X, what do you expect the model to say? Italy. Very good. Just Just a random example. Yeah. So if I say instead, just to see what else it has learned, what kind of relationships it has learned. Good is to best, as bad is to what? Yeah, very good. And the model is also very good. Brother is to uncle, as sister is to what? Yeah. And man is to king, as woman is to queen, as we've seen. Very good. We'll get back to this in a short while. Now, as said, this is learned from a lot of data. Now, what's data? I said anything. Is that a good idea to put everything in? No? Yes? Yes, as an example of anything that is produced. Also, if somebody has to decide, how do you decide if something should go in or should not go in? But, really everything? Let's assume we do everything, okay? Now, usually, you have two types of data. One is smaller, curated. For example, there's one thing that's called, for example, the British National Corpus, that is really like a data set that represents some time of British English, and it's pretty small, and it's all nicely done. There are no mistakes, and so on. And then there's everything. Yeah, so there's internet. The great thing is that you can get whatever you want from the internet, or almost. And we are not going to get into the privacy issues and so, because I know too little about it, and because it opens a huge other can, and it's not part of this, but we can discuss it if you want. Now, if you look at web data, now you know that internet participation has been shown to be mainly by young users in developed countries. Now, if I take all the data from the internet, I'm kind of leaving out a pretty big portion of the world in terms of representations. Yeah, we've seen that these models learn a lot of representations and relations with one another, but only as in the mind of some groups, developed countries, mostly young people. Now, I don't know if you've all ever heard of Reddit. That's a social media platform. I'm not saying it's really like Twitter, but the principle is the same. You have a username, and there's sort of topics that you can discuss, and that also has a lot of accessible data. So people do the work I do in language technology. They like data. It's available. It's there. You take it. Now, it turns out Reddit users are 60% men, 64% are in that age range, and most of them are liberal. Is it a bad thing? I don't even want to say it's a bad or a good thing, but it's limited. The way that the world is described by language that we put into these models, if I take Reddit data, is the world seen by 18 to 29 liberal men, mostly. Do you think that I would talk about the world in exactly the same way that an 18-year-old liberal man? I don't know it myself, but you can wonder whether that kind of distribution makes language, or does it only make a sub-portion of language? And you go like, okay, let's not go into social media. Let's not do Reddit. We do Wikipedia. Yeah? That's better. Yeah, you go like, okay, let's do Wikipedia. I guess many of you use Wikipedia. It's more factual. It's better written. You can trust it more, right? I want to show you something. Can you look at these two descriptions? They talk about the same event. So the first description is Loretta Young. The second description is Grant Withers. They got married by eloping, and then the marriage was annulled, and whatever. End of story. Now, what do you notice there? Anything that catches your attention? Yes. Yes. So, here is the same story, yeah? But getting married is part of the woman's career. Yeah. This is Wikipedia. And getting married is part of his personal life, but it's part of her career. It's not so nice, is it? Then what is this model learning? If this model is so good and making all these associations, then it's going to learn that actually getting married is part of a career of a woman, but not of a man. Man is personal life. Now, we can use Wikipedia, but Wikipedia, the proportion of contributors is up to 15% who are women or girls across the world. Now, I don't want to say that this thing, maybe this was done by a woman. I really do not know who did this. But what I want to say is that the view of how things are portrayed and written can be subjective even in Wikipedia, and that can also depend on the demographics of the contributors. Right? What are the consequences of this? Now, we use these big models like also in Google Translate, right? And in language generation, and in a lot of tools in profiling, in job ads. Now, is a woman whose career is getting married as suitable as a man who probably has a different career for a given job ad? You know, the models learn about these things, about correlations between, relations between words. This is what they learn from. They learn from data, so the way that you describe things is important. Now, I just give you one example of this, but then we also go back to machine translation. So there's a system that's yet another task that does automatic analysis of restaurant reviews. So many reviews. You want to know whether a review is positive or negative. Sometimes you have the stars, sometimes you just have the text or so. So can the text tell us if something is positive or negative? Now, there was a study that showed that basically all Mexican restaurants were underrated compared to their own actual star, because the model that was doing this task had been trained on a lot of news from the Trump age that was really demonizing Mexicans. It has nothing to do with the Mexican restaurants, nothing. But it learned a negative association, it learned the negative associations between Mexicans, the term Mexican, and anything, just a negative association with the term Mexican. Okay? Now, machine translation that is so good is not exempt from these things. Because also for machine translation, you have to have seen a lot of data. Now, I just give you an example that concerns me personally. English doesn't mark gender. So if I say I'm a professor and you don't know that I'm talking, it could be a man or it could be a woman, right? We agree on that. In Italian, this is not the case. When you translate from English to Italian, you have to make a decision. And you have to decide whether you're saying male professor or female professor. You cannot escape that. You have to make a decision. So if you translate, this is the Italian form. Professore is male and professoressa is female. The translation of I'm a professor just goes straight to male. I'm not so upset about that. It's okay. I expect that because in Italian, male, it's actually the form that is more common. If you have a dictionary, you will find an adjective that can also be male and female and singular and plural, will all be different. It will be stored in the dictionary in its masculine form. Yeah, so this can make sense, right? Because it's the standard form, sort of more unmarked, and I believe it's also probably more frequent. But it's pretty good because if you actually specify that it's a woman, like Mary is a professor, it knows that Mary è una professoressa, so that's good. It knows how to do this. Yeah, it knows the female counterpart. So I think that it's a good sign. And if I say Mary is an associate professor, it translates it correctly, and it also puts here, you see the Professoressa A associata A, so it puts them together. That's correct. It means associate professor woman. So it really knows how to do that. But what's the next career stage? And there's not marriage. It's a full professor. Now, if Mary is a full professor, it turns into a man. Now, the situation is clear, right? Yeah, what happened? Okay. Now, why? Because it is quite likely that the association between, well, these two words, professoressa ordinaria, is not very much found in the data. Is it, though, because of how we describe the world? Or is it because of how the world is? That there are fewer full professors who are female than male. And what do we want? Do we want models that are very good at representing reality? Or do we want models that can handle that without making people upset? What do we want? Do we want reality? Do we want flexibility? Do we want just pure fairness? I'll leave you to think about that. I'll just give you another example. So we saw this. This was the professor and the professore. This was a case on Twitter. Somebody posted a tweet, some Hungarian person. Hungarian doesn't mark gender. It's a bit like English, but it also doesn't mark, doesn't have the gender pronouns. So this, various things that are written here could apply, that I'll tell you in a moment what they are, but they could apply to both a male or a female. And these are descriptions of various, I don't know, does anyone know Hungarian? No, me neither, but I read the tweet, and there's a whole discussion on this. And some of them are like professions, some are adjectives, like smart or so. So now Google Translate could make a decision of how to make a pronoun for each of those. So associated to a given profession, it could choose whether it would be a she or it would be a he. And the same with adjectives. You could say she's smart or it could say he's smart. Now, this was the decision it made. Okay, she's beautiful and he's clever. He reads. She washes the dishes. Yeah. It's not, it isn't made up. Okay, now are you a bit outraged by this? Yeah, okay. Yeah, okay. But I have a question, and it's a very provocative question. Didn't you yourselves rely on stereotypes when you had to judge the tweets? To some extent. Now, just bear that in mind, because where is Google Translate learning all this stuff from that really outrages us? And is propagating stereotypes, where did he learn it from? From us. Maybe we should just be careful in how we talk and how we write. How we live, what we do, yeah? Before maybe blaming them. I think we have to be extremely careful with the way that we use the machines, but before just blaming machines, we should always remember, where is this coming from? And also that we say us, and it's probably, yes, it's us, and a lot of people in the world didn't even have the right to produce that language because the language was never included in these models. Because they're not online. And all this is taken from material online. Right? I'll just give you this to outrage you a bit more. These are queries for some words on Google Image. Professor, just so that we get an idea of why models learn that stuff. You just see what you find. Doctor, nurse, yeah, homemaker, and CEO. Now, this was June 2017, and I used June 2017 simply because a colleague of mine already had these nice screenshots. Maybe it's a bit different right now, but I don't think it's radically different. Not sure. Now, I think soon we have to take a break, but before we take a break, I think it's I want to show you something. This information that percolates down, for example, the machine translation, comes from this model, and these are the representations that we've seen, okay, that we can poke and we can look into. And these are called word embeddings. And I just say that because you might see now this word appear. And it's the same thing. It's word representation. It's this stuff. Okay? It's a simplification, but it's good. It's enough to know this. Now, you remember that we checked with the tool what the analogies were. Yeah, so we can say man is to king as queen is to blah, blah, blah. Right? So we can also use those, we did this stuff. Now, we can also use the tool then to see whether these cases that are a little bit dodgy or problematic, how they are encoded in these representations. Yeah, specifically, not just to look at the output, say, of a machine translation, but really to look at the model inside. Now, if I ask this, if you look at king and man and queen and woman, it's pretty straightforward what you would expect, right? Because they are really related. I mean, there's specific words for that. Now, we said English doesn't mark gender on the noun. Well, in some cases it does, like actor and actress, right? But it doesn't. So if I have to say a female doctor, either I say a female doctor or I say doctor, right? There's no other term. So what am I expecting here? Yeah, right? So, but before you do get nurse. Wait. No, wait. No, wait. So I've done this before. And I had someone starting to, screenshot, put stuff on Twitter. Wait. Yeah, the world is bad, but it might not be as bad as it seems. And also, it's not, the responsibility is not in one place only. Okay? It's good to be outraged. Bias is there. It's a problem. But let's wait a sec. Now, if I say man is to computer programmer as woman is to X, what do you expect? Yeah, getting married. So yeah, because it's a career. Eloping or so. No, what you get is homemaker. Yeah, we saw these nice pictures earlier, right? Okay. Now, it's bad, right? When you look at it like that, and it's so bad that both the community, but also like more popular literature picked up on this a couple of years ago, now it's about 5 years ago, a bit more, when this came out, and it was like, oh my God, what is this? It's really bad. So there were these papers like, man, NeurIPS is the biggest conference in machine learning, in neural nets, which is around. The Association for Computational Linguistics, is the biggest conference that we have as computational linguists, and that's a paper that was written about this. So computer programmer woman is to homemaker, black is to criminal, Caucasian is to police. It's really bad. But yeah, it's bad. But suspend your final judgment, please. And that one is also, of course, bad. So man is to doctors, woman is to nurse, gender bias in word embeddings, and so on. Bad. I have nothing, I cannot say that this is not bad. But how do we use, we as practitioners, we got so scared of what we were seeing and the consequences that this might have. Like, you see this stuff and everyone here went like, oh. You feel really embarrassed. You go like, no, this is bad. And then if you think as practitioner, what happens if you use this, if you deploy this language technology in the world, you think like, no, this is really bad. And I have the feeling that we did well by putting our finger on this problem, but we didn't do too well in losing concentration a bit and overemphasizing bias everywhere. So this exists, but it's not the actual reality. So let me just give you a brief explanation of what's going on. The problem here, of course, is that if you have bias in models, bias in tools, and bias in beliefs, they will reinforce each other, right? So assume that you want to hire someone for an engineering job, and somewhere subconsciously you think a man is better, you're not a bad person. Stereotyping is what we live by. It happens. Yeah, we all used them earlier in the tweets as well. Yeah, so maybe somewhere you have some gut feeling that a man should be better, and then the machine tells you, oh, man, women are good for marriage, take a man. That actually goes to reinforce what you were already thinking. Yeah, so that is a bad thing, and we need to address that. So if you think that the doctor, in your mind, the doctor is male, and then the text will go like doctor, you write doctor he, right? Because you're talking about the doctor and think is a male, then some language technology tool will translate the doctor as male, for example, in Italian. You just continue this circle. So it's good to be very careful. But this analogy tool that we used, how does it work? It works like this. Yeah? Man is to king as woman is to queen. Yeah, we said this. So what do? The principle is this. You take B, so king, you remove some manness from it, you add woman to it, and you get queen. So that's how you manipulate it. That's how it works. But it has a little trick to make it work well. And the trick is not trivial. So the tool, as it's been used by everyone, and a lot of people also maybe without knowing it entirely, but we jumped on this is so bad, and we tried to find bias everywhere. So the tool works in a way that the three words that you give as input, A, B, and C, can never be returned by the system. What does it imply? It implies that if I say man is to king as woman is to X, let's see what it tells me, I cannot get as an answer man, king, or woman. In this case, it's fine because the answer I want is queen. So queen is allowed to be shown to me. But if I have he is to doctor as she is to X, my poor model, who surely is extremely biased, and it's our fault that it's biased, cannot tell me doctor, is not allowed to. It's a simple implementation issue. The way that the tool has been constructed doesn't let you return the original three words that you used. So if you do this, there's this condition. The condition is actually for any of the words. So this word here can never be the same as this. Okay? Just as it's constructed, it's for those who code or know about coding, like programming, it's 3 lines that you can remove. Yeah, no, it's true. But it was done like that because otherwise this nice analogy would not often work as well. And when it was done, no one really thought of this bias thing or that it would affect downstream all of this discussion. No one thought about that. It's like, okay, works better if you can never return the input words. It's fine. Yeah, and then when we started to see all these problems with bias, it took us a long time to realize that, and a lot of published papers, a lot, and podcast episodes, and talks, where we shock the world by saying that doctors are men and women are nurses. And I'm not saying that does not exist, because even if the first one cannot be returned, what you see is the second. Okay, so the second one is nurse, it's true. But the very first one is actually doctor. Now, I did run it all. I removed the 3 lines, and I ran it. And what you see here, I put in brackets what you get in the tool as I described it to you at the beginning. Like, you cannot return the word. So it does very nicely. Italy is Italy anyway. Worst was good, but if you let it return any of the original words, it will choose best. So it's good, but not, worst would be nicer. It's so symmetrical. It's so nice. And here also doesn't really return queen. This would be the second one. Yeah, what you see here, Italy, worst, and queen, would be the second ones. Yeah, because the first one is a word that was not allowed to be shown. Okay? Now what happens with doctor? That would be doctor when you had nurse. So in order you see doctor, if that is not available, it has to say nurse. And the same computer programmer, it tells us homemaker, but if you let it return anything, it will still say computer programmer. Okay? And what about black is to criminal as Caucasian is to X? You remember what we had in the paper? Police. Right, that was bad. Why do I have nothing here? Because police was not there, was not second, was not third, was not fourth, was just not there. It was really down the list. I think it was somewhere maybe in the top 20. If it was there, it was really low. But we got so obsessed with this problem and so anxious about this problem that we thought that we had to overshow it. We, as a community, we published papers in the main conferences where it said, police. But the police was not there. But then we contacted the authors and said, well, what was this thing with police? So, well, it was in some set that we had selected. And of course, that is quite striking if you see police there. Maybe the other one was something completely irrelevant, because maybe these models are not that great all the time. But where's the problem now here? The problem is in us as well. As we present the data, as we discuss the data, as we analyze the data, we have to be, the bias is there. I'm not denying that. But we really have to find a good balance as practitioners, as users of technology, as producers of the language that goes in the technology. And always remember who is represented by this technology. Now, I think, do we have to have a break? Yeah, okay. So I'll leave it there for now. I think it's a good break moment with some nice reminder of cherry picking. And I cherry-picked the tweets that I've shown you. I didn't make them up, but I cherry-picked them to make them a little tricky. Yeah, of course I did. We all do. Yeah, but we always have to remember when we deal with language where we stand, and that at the core of the models there's, this little thing there, which is humans. So I'll see you back, right? So we have coffee now. And then we come back here and we finish up. And you can ask me all the questions you want. Okay. Okay. See. Okay, so we were here. I had left this slide with a nice cherry picking and the responsibility of humans in the procedure that goes from data to model to output and interpretation, because we are in each part of that process. And I also had added, as a reminder, something that brings us back to the beginning when I asked you to tell me the gender of the person who wrote a tweet, and how we all rely on stereotypes, and we also kind of laugh about it because it's a situation like this. But imagine how all this actually affects everything. And there was a study really on author profiling that had been done a few years back, and they compared what machines do and what humans do. And they found that their performance is very similar, but people rely more on stereotypes than actually machines even do. And that is because machines can also find patterns that, because they've seen so much data, that we're not used to. For example, we had a model that was associating I am with males and to say or to eat, some sequence like that with females. And that is not something that we normally are hit by. We don't see that, right? We just see what we've seen. We see the football. We're a bit trivial that way. But that's it. We shouldn't, that's how it is. And I think we just have to be aware of that. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but let's just consider that when we produce language and when we use technology. Let's remember that if I find that the machine translation system is doing weird stuff by assigning gender to words or stuff that I don't like so much or that rages me a bit, let's remember where humans are in all this process. Now, this was, I wanted to take stock a sec. We have about, I'm not going to talk for much more, and then we can have a discussion if you have any questions for me, or we can open up any sort of points that I've touched upon or not. So one thing that I wanted to notice is that a lot really depends on what we want to show and what we want to see. In the sense that when we talk, we say stuff in a way that we have decided, like we frame the world in a certain way. But we also, also as practitioners, if we want to see bias because we know it's there, we'll push it that way, also with tools, because we want to expose it, and we might even overemphasize it. But it's also our choice as humans to do that. And I think we should never forget that when we use language technology. Another thing that I think we should always bear in mind is that language is complicated. And it's not so straightforward. I can say the same thing in so many different ways. And English is not my native language. I probably make a lot of mistakes and I don't use the appropriate words here and there, and another person would have said the same thing, even with the same perspective, but differently. And apart from all the individual variations, communication is not only done by a language. I point to stuff, we see things, but these models mostly see language. They don't see the other modalities. There's a lot of work on trying to make multimodal models so that they are fed with, for example, both images and text, so that they can make associations with visual things. But most of these models that we've talked about, for example, GPT-2, is trained with just language. Is that enough to really learn language? We do it very, very differently. And also, not everything which is maybe weird or that we don't like is intentional. Something is just an intrinsic characteristic of language, and there's just no one to blame. But we need to remember that. I just want to give you an example for that. What is this? A sheep. Okay. What? Dolly the sheep. Let's say, yeah, a sheep. Okay, thank you. Yeah. And What is this? A black sheep. Okay, yeah. So this is a sheep. Let's see, where is that? Oops, doesn't go back. Okay, we saw sheep and we saw black sheep. Now, if I search, which one is more frequent? Right? Now, my model needs to know that a sheep is usually white. Okay? If I want my model to learn that fact, and my model is only exposed to language, my model will learn that mostly, actually, sheep are black. Because if I have to say sheep, I'll just say sheep, if it's a white sheep, because that's default. And if I want to say that it's black, I'll say black sheep, because that's different from the common one. But if my model only sees language, it will see a lot of black sheep. Right? Is it somebody's fault?
Yeah, but what if you started with a black sheep, and then after it was a white one?
No, yeah, sure. I mean, there could be places where actually black sheep are more frequent. But what I wanted to say is that in language, when we talk about things, the basic characteristics of something are usually left non-specified by language. Yeah, I rarely just go about to say that I'm moving my finger. I mean, I don't specify very specific things. I do when they're different from default. But if I use language that way, which is normal, then my models will make associations which do not necessarily correspond to reality. And we should remember this also when we see maybe weird things. That's a nice example, I thought. This is frequencies that are taken from a corpus that is about news. Yeah, so it's news articles. And then they check the verbs. And murdered, yeah, is much more frequent than blinked. Now, I have no idea how many times cumulatively we have blinked tonight, but a lot. Surely a lot. And I hope no one was murdered. But in general, it's the things that we do normally might be the things that we actually talk about the least. And if we use language that we produce to make a model of the world, that might not be so accurate. You know, sometimes it is, sometimes it's less, but again, this is the characteristics of language that we really have to bear in mind. And it's all is on its own. And the other thing that I think I want to just, taking stock now and going to the closing, is that these models are amazing, but they're not human. So there's this funny picture. So we've seen these models like GPT-2. They belong to all these families called deep learning. And this is, you see the picture. So our brains are complex and we don't understand how they work. Deep learning networks are complex and we don't understand how they work. Therefore, deep learning works like the brain. And of course, it's paradoxical, but that is also like in parallel with the fact that we think that just by having models that look a bit like us or write a bit like us, they have learned language like us. But they haven't. They reproduce, they look like, they mock it. They haven't really fully understood what they're saying. And there's a big debate also about that in the community. So let's remember that models are not human, and we should be careful with how we use language technology and with what we say. But also, we should play down the hype of these models. We started with being very, very excited about the generated text, and I still am, because, or the translation. It got the idioms right, it's brilliant. But, let's down to earth. Let's remember what they are. Let's remember what data they learn from. And it's true. They're quite amazing, but they don't have human intelligence, and they don't necessarily understand anything. They write stuff. They wrote the KNGs, blah, blah, blah. They know that BMW and Audi have to go together, near one another. But it's not that they know what they've written. Yeah, it's a sequence of tokens, a sequence of expressions that go well together, symbols that go well together. But there's no necessarily meaning. And the longer you make them produce text, the more evident it becomes, because there's a lot of incoherence with respect to actual situation in the world. Now, there's a lot of discussion also on these generating models that are so good, but know nothing, and they produce fake news, as somebody said at the very beginning. And there's some work that goes like, okay, if they can produce all this stuff, we can have automated disinformation, in huge amounts. And that is unfortunately true. I mean, this is true that it's possible. But we should also bear in mind that it also depends on who, there's always someone then who wants to do that. It's not that because the model can, this will be necessarily misused, but it can be misused. That is true. There's also apparently the case that this big models, and here it's talking about GPT-3, which is now the younger, stronger brother of GPT-2. Apparently, if you let it generate, it produces a lot of toxic language. So again, you can produce really a lot of hateful speech at massive scale. Of course, that's dangerous. That's not good. But there was a discussion on that too. And it was a bit like that. There was on Twitter a few days ago. This is just the beginning of May. So this person here on the left, it says this is a new model. Another one of these with a weird name, yeah? So it's OPT 175B. That also has to do with how big the model is. And it says that, let's see, it goes on in the thread to show how dangerous this machine can be. And then someone else in the community said, a language model, LM, so this big model's generated toxic language might be undesired, but is not dangerous per se. That's what he's saying. And in the thread, the other guy is saying they found that this model can make a lot of harmful content, meaning that it might do some nasty things regardless of whether or not you tell it to. This is a core point. It might do some nasty things. Can the model do some nasty things? And there was a reply. Generating harmful text is not the same thing as doing some nasty things. I like this point because it also opens up a bit discussion. And this is all recent. I mean, we talk about this stuff in the community now also because every day there's a new model and more powerful and it's producing more stuff. But saying that the model is going to do nasty things, it sort of makes it a human when it's not. And I don't think we should make this model humans. They're not human. They're not. But it's true that they can produce content which can be misused. And there's also yet another debate, and I'm closing, about hype. These models this was an article in the New York Times by less than a month ago, and it's fact. AI is mastering language. Is it so? We've seen it generates amazing text, but is it really mastering language? For me, we master language. The AI, I'm not sure is mastering language. And there was a reply by someone in our field. And the idea is resist the urge to be impressed. Resist it. It's so easy to be impressed. I myself, I know all the limits, and I am impressed. When I see these generations, I'm going like, whoa. And when I see the machine translated stuff, I'm like, wow. But let's remember that these people, these machines do not have, they're not people. They're not sentient. They reproduce language, but they're not humans. Right? Now, just to go back on the machine translation thing, so if they're not human, can we say that they achieve human parity? And what about all this hype? Well, I just want to bring this back, because a colleague of mine here in Groningen ran a study on actually what they showed and found out that this is completely untrue. So this was, the huge hype, like, okay, time to witness the miracle of Google Translate. Translation is approaching human-level accuracy and all that. No, that was on a very specific case study, which only worked for Chinese and English, and the data that had been evaluated was actually automatically translated, so the original text was already automatically translated. It was not human-produced. So it was all wrong. The study was all wrong. So this was completely like, no. And let's not say these things. Let's not talk about human parity, these machines are human. So it's not how it is. These are really good tools, incredibly good tools, and they teach us a lot about language and about the culture that is described by the language that they learn or they're exposed to. But they don't become humans because they can reproduce this language. Okay? Now, just to finish, and then I'll leave you. Yeah, so this is another idiomatic expression in Dutch. Yeah. So it's, it's translated like that in Italian, and it's a literal translation. But we have the same say in Italian, and this is not correctly translated. No. Yeah, because in Italy, swallows come earlier. So, yeah. It's clearly not human level. Any Italian human would know that this is a sign of spring and not summer, and this should have maybe been a sign also for me to just prepare me for the Dutch weather when I moved here, just to know that actually, sayings tell a lot, and if you have a different in season. Oh, about the we say crazy April. Yeah, well, yes. Yes, so there's a season issue, and Google doesn't know about it. Yeah. Now, to finish, this one. Ah, okay. I don't think it will. Well, we can try on Google. True. Yeah. Okay, we can try if that also. Well, we can see whether, because if I put it in, it might recognize it then as an idiom. Because it will know the sequence better. If it's always seen it with no, then it will know that that is a special sequence. So we can try that later to see what the Google Translate does. Now, just to leave you with some messages. What did we see? We saw incredible progress, and it's true. It's also almost magical performance of language technology in generation, almost, text that you cannot tell was not, you could not tell, it was not written by a human. Incredible progress, and that's true. We've also seen some intrinsic limitations of language technology. And they have to do with how language works, with just the fact that we only take language and we don't take any other means of communication that we humans use. And also the fact that we only have a small representation of actually how language is used in the world. And also, we've seen that there are some potentially dangerous consequences of language technology. But I think that has a lot to do with using language technology in a bit of a blind way, as a sort of substitute for us. I mean, if we are more aware I think we reduce, and we are engaged, I think we do reduce the dangers. And of course, me and us, our community as practitioners, I feel we have quite a lot of responsibility in this, and also in how we portray technology. You know, the hype or the for the bad and for the good. We have to be careful how we describe what we do and what the tools can or cannot do. So, to finish, I think I've also I've also taken you to a place where there are a lot of directions possible. And we can really choose, you know. We want to use it blindly. We want to use it more consciously. Can we pay attention to how we act, how we speak, how much we use Google Translate, how much we trust it? You know, we're all actors, agents. We're all responsible. And if we are aware of also limitations, but also potential, I think, you know, it's going to be a better world also with language technology. Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks a lot for this exciting lecture. I'm sure there are some people who have some questions.
I have one. Okay. I want to know, the language generation, is it a byproduct of the translation, or who uses it? Why does it exist in the first place?
It exists as a core tool. Yeah. Well, you can use it as such, but you can use it with chatbots, for example. You know, when they reply back to you, they will have to generate text. It's almost everywhere. It's also part of translation, of course. Question answering, you know, automatic question answering. You ask a question, and then the model has to answer back. Almost everything, when there's language production in any of the tasks, you will need, if it's not classification, for example, oh, is this a male or a female or so, then you do have that. Yeah.
Lou?
It was a marvelous lecture you gave, so thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks.
You started with giving examples where there's a lot of bias in, like Wikipedia, written 80% or 85% by male. The algorithm cannot correct for this kind of bias, because if you know the sources you feed in, then you also know the bias, and then you can correct for it one way or the other.
Yeah, it's a very good point. I think there's a lot of research in that direction. It's really called debiasing. And you can do it in various ways. So you can do it on the data to start with. So you could alter the data. And for example, it's also done. Like if you have a lot of references, for example, in doctor and male and so, you try to swap them. So that then there's also evidence of female. There's a lot of data manipulation or data curation that can be done, so that you remove some of this. This is one way. You can do it algorithmically. So at the moment when the model is learning, you force it to sort of shift attention, let's say, to some things or others. And you can do it at the end. So you train the third way. So you train the model as is. And then you take these representations that we have seen, these word embeddings, and then you shift them a bit. You change the final representation of the model so that it's not so heavily biased towards something. There are ways to do that. It's been shown that it's very hard to achieve something that is really then successful when you use the model for the final tasks. So you will see that things do not eventually, so you might remove some evident correlations, but there will still be some that are in there, and they will pop up anyway. The other discussion is whether you should do it at all. So you do that because maybe if you do then job ad matching with CV, you have less bias, but you're sort of altering the reality that language was referring to. It's a discussion that goes on. I've seen very, very recent work, like last month, that I thought was super interesting. I can go back, right? No, I cannot. So there was this point where I showed you that you use a huge amount of data to make a general model, and then you specify it a bit with some more data. So for example, I made the example of legal. So at that specification moment, you can steer the model a bit towards things that you think are better. So you don't really change the data, but you add data that is a bit better. Like in that, so you push the model, the model's knowledge, towards something that you think, specifically then for your task, is fairer. And that seems to work. And I like that approach also because it's not changing things in a way, it's not removing things without even knowing whether it's going to be successful, but it's trying to steer positively. So it's a positive take to me instead of a negative take, let's say. So I like that. So it's less censoring and more like, look, I show you something positive, now learn this. And from my perspective, I like it better.
Over there.
Yeah, my apologies for you having to walk this far. So, so thank you for this very nice talk. I was wondering whether we can also use this technology to improve our English text. So we generate a lot of scientific text in English, which is not a native language. So to me, giving it a text that's almost perfect, can this be used then to perfect the text that you've written?
Yeah, so there was some discussion as to, okay, we have these models. It maybe relates a little bit to the question that Valerie also had. So what do we use this for? And does it have any positive use? Okay, we can generate really bad toxic content with this. So what are positive uses for this? And there was an article where they were showing that this was used for creative writing, to overcome writer's block, for example, so that you see some prompts. Yeah, you see some prompts, and that sort of gives you some ideas. Of course, it has the danger that actually you just write something which is not yours, is machine-produced. But I can see that there could be positive, like, ways of using these models to, like, say, rewrite this that way. Or we actually are doing some work on, so whenever you talk about something, you can always phrase it in different ways. And, well, we're working on a bit sad data, but we work with the descriptions of traffic crashes in the Netherlands, where bikes are involved. And usually, these are described in such a way that the driver has never a responsibility. So, like, the cyclist hit an open car door, when what happened is that the driver actually opened the door and hit the cyclist, right? So, what we're working on is trying to detect these cases where the perspective could be unfavorable, say, to the cyclist, or trying to background the driver. And what we haven't done that yet, but what we want to do is to at least highlight this and say, look, actually, if you write it this other way, maybe that gives a different perspective. So I don't know if that means that we can improve our English, but I think it can give us ways to see things from a different perspective. And in terms of improving, I don't know, a lot of the things that we see are cherry-picked. It's not perfect. It writes really well, but I don't know if scientific texts would be appropriate. I know that there have been papers written completely, fully automatically that have been submitted to conferences and accepted. So, with no content, of course. Yeah, it's all blah, blah, blah. Conferences that are not that good, let's say. But probably I didn't answer. Yeah, GPT-2, I probably didn't answer your question. But there's a lot of use to this, and possibly, I guess, I'm a bit doubtful about the improving writing. There's also one, so you have data that is human translated, for example, books and so on. You also have data that is machine translated. And if you train a model to distinguish them, even if the translation is very good, normally the models can tell this is automatically translated, this is human translated, with very high accuracy. And I think that's because the way that there's less creativity, they're a bit more repetitive. They're not human. The automatic translation is detectable. So I don't know if then they can really help us in generated text to better our English, because maybe it's not better. But no, for sure. You could try, for example, in the second phase of steering it, you could try to use a lot of, for example, scientific data, and
Ton, and then...
Thanks for a very nice lecture. When you talk about feeding the model with data, are you talking about English or are you talking about Italian or French?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I had a slide with multiple languages and I removed that because I thought there's not enough time. But I've basically only talked about English and a bit of Italian and a bit of Dutch. But no, we also feed models with other languages. And you can make monolingual models, so a model that only speaks English or Italian. But what's very trendy now is also to make multilingual models. So it's a model that has been exposed to 100 different languages and has tried to learn them together, meaning that it has learned some correspondences between, for example, book, libro in Italian and book in Dutch. So it knows that in some way they might behave similarly, like they might encounter words that they also have similarity. For example, read or lezen. So there are models that, and the advantage of those is that when you want to steer them to a more specific task, you could use data from one language if you don't have it in another, because the general model has learned these correspondences. They're not as strong as the monolingual models, but they're pretty good. And they're very interesting for me, for example, because you can see how the different languages are represented, and some are less, some are more, and can, for example, English help Dutch, but does English also equally helps Italian, or maybe better with Dutch because they're closer? So also as a linguist, I think it's extremely interesting in that sense, yeah.
Here? Yes.
Hi.
Malvina, thank you once again for a great talk. And I would like to get back to the sir that asked the question about text improvement. I have a confession to make. For one of my courses, I have used such a tool for one of my papers. It's not a thesis. So
He's my student.
it wasn't your course, but I have used it for a philosophical paper. It's not miraculous, but it did get the job done for a way. I haven't used it on the old paper, so...
Should I stop listening?
No, no, no.
Okay.
What I do want to say is that a few days ago, I've read on Twitter that some students did generate GPT-3
Yeah.
essays.
Yeah, yeah.
And then the question, maybe it's a bit more getting philosophical right now, is what do we think of this? Is this morally rejectable?
Yeah.
Is this plagiarism?
Yeah.
Is
I-
it plagiaat?
Yeah, I think I read the same tweet and the same thread. When there was a reply, if it was the same one, then somebody said, okay, well then, but then we teachers can also use GPT-3 to grade them. So, you know, then that's that. But I thought that there was the general idea then of that thread was more positive in a way. And so the idea was, okay, we cannot really prevent this. So how can we use it to our learning advantage? Like, can we use these models then? Because students will use them if they can generate, you know, some student has used them. So then maybe we should interact with them. But this also relates to what I was trying to say earlier. Not everything is bad, right? So maybe we should try to interact with them in a way that is constructive. So maybe we cannot prevent students from using them. So let's see. Can they then report on how the model produced this language in the context that they were supposed to have written about? Or what are the mistakes? Or, you know, I think we have to rethink the way that we do expect students to write essays, because it's going to be a real problem.
Over there. And then back.
Thanks a lot for a very nice presentation, but I'm somewhat confused. We learn as humans quite different. We learn them by interacting with our surroundings and then slowly getting used to our surroundings, the way we grow up and the way the artificial intelligence, the word is more than what it actually is, because it categorizes. It has 500 or 600 points on which they compare texts. So they categorize the language. So can we speak about learning? They don't learn anything.
I think if we don't talk about human learning, but machine learning, yes, we can talk about learning. Because they had a training objective, so they had to learn something, and they did. It might not correspond to what humans learn, but they did learn, for example, the probabilities of the next word. Yeah, so how to produce the next word given that. Is it meaningful from the perspective of human learning? Maybe not, but I do think it is. It is learning. It is learning a task. It is learning something, which is not what. It's not. If we want to talk about language learning, it's something else. So they learn to reproduce some sequences, which look like language, and they do it very, very well. So they do learn because they are exposed to data, and they learn to reproduce stuff. So yes, I would say that we can talk about learning, but not necessarily about human learning.
There's also no creativity in it because due to the fact that we act and the surroundings respond, there can be new situations. And we have to give words to that to communicate them or even to isolate them from other points. And they only reproduce. There's nothing in it.
Okay, I would say that I kindly object to that because I selected some of these paragraphs that were generated and others I left out because they were so crazy that you would spot immediately that they were automatically generated. And it doesn't mean that they were wrong or bad syntax, but they were so out of, like, you know, what? Already these ones about the BMW and Audi, I thought, yeah. But some of them were so weird, and I'm not sure they were easy to conceive for a person. I would not say, so this is just one thing from observation, but technically, it is possible that these models make new words and new names because the way that they learn, I've simplified most of what I've shown you. It's not wrong, but it was simpler. So I've shown you words, but they actually learn sub-portions of words and how to recombine them because that gives them more flexibility or, for example, for morphology. Yeah, they learn that, for example, professoressa is professor, and then there's something that ends, and that bit can also be applied to other words. So they learn sub-portions of words, and sometimes they compose them in ways that do not exist. They're very funny. And they actually make up lots of proper nouns that do not exist. So you can generate, we have a model that, for Italian, for example, was trained on a lot of Wikipedia, and you can prompt it by saying, you know, your name and Wikipedia, and we'll make a stuff about you. Just saying what the name of your father was, and you graduated in a university, blah, 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 that doesn't exist. But, you know, nice name. It's actually, there was also another study that tried to, it was also done with visual stuff, and they tried to create words, so names for color shades. It was hilarious. So it was brilliant. So there was like lots of weird, I don't know, brown, biscuit brown. Yeah, I actually do not think that creativity there is an issue. It's there by accident. It's not that the model wants to be creative. You see, I mean, I think it's there by accident, but it's not missing. Actually, I think it writes weirder and wilder stuff than we conceive. Because it has no borders. It doesn't know what it's talking about.
Okay, last question by Bart.
So very nice talk, thank you. I was thinking a little bit about how I learned my language, and that was also in a very biased setting. So I remember some words that I used as a child, I would never use them today. And another thing is that I did not hear so much language, right? So it was just the kids talking to one another, and I did not read so many books. I read comic books. So can you compare a little bit the difference between GPT-3, which
sees a lot, actually more or less all language that is around, in a sense, also
Yeah.
is biased. Well, maybe you can say something.
Yeah, so natural language learning is really not my specialty. But of course, this parallel that you mentioned is been conceived by many others who are trying to see whether different models, so these models that we've seen are very, very data hungry. Some other models behave in a way where you could use less data, so not a transformer, but for example, other model like an LSTM or so. So it could use less data, and it's more analyzable in the process that it uses to learn. And there are studies that try to compare, like, how is actually the learning happening if I give very targeted data, like I only gave child speech. So what happens then? And there's a PhD student that I collaborate with at times, and she's in Italy, and she's working on this, like, what if the model only sees some it's actually child-directed speech? What does it learn? And these are hard experiments, and a lot of the times, the things that come out are not very meaningful. But I think that's because you provide, so the advantage of these big models is that they have only one modality, so language, bias, everything you want, but huge amount. And the other models, they still have one modality only, but little. And then it's very hard to produce something which is meaningful. It's closer probably to human learning, but they don't have any other, mom looks at you when she's saying things. Maybe she doesn't say much. She just says one word, but she has, very angry eyes. So that's a message that comes through, and it's lost if you just give that word to a model that doesn't have anything else to go by. But I think it's a very interesting direction of comparing like proper human learning and this machine learning. No.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
No, thank you.
Continue with the wine over there
Ah.
afterwards, but
Ah.
we thank Malvina very much.
No, thank you.
I have a little souvenir
Thank
booklet for
you.
you to remember this evening.
Of course I will. Yeah. Thanks.
No other? This was the last one of the season, I think, right? No? One more on June.
Ah.
Sorry. Yes, right. We have the next one still in June. Oh, that's the one that didn't take place, so that we are doing now. Yes. So if you want to come, please remember again to register so that we know how much coffee and wine we need for the meeting. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.